try and reference them as we go to make the webinar as interactive as we can, rather than me just lecturing you. I'm really grateful to Orlaith Curran and Aideen for joining me to support me on this. They're two excellent practitioners in their own right. I'm very lucky to work with them, along with everyone else that's involved in the physical preparation side at Irish Hockey. And they'll be able to give you some valuable insights as well, give you their examples of some of the things we present on, and touch base in terms of from the 21 side, also from university setting and from club setting and school setting as well. So we've a good range. So we'll kick it off. Okay, so we're going to look at our KPIs that we look at within Hockey Ireland. Okay, so when it comes to strength and conditioning, essentially what we're looking at doing is preparing our athletes, enabling them to perform, and then we want them to recover. We break that down further. We want our athletes to be fitter, faster, stronger. Who doesn't? And what that actually means for us then is, when we look at them being fitter, have they got that repeat sprint ability? We can test that, we can profile it. When it comes to performance, can they increase their high speed meters, their output? And when it comes to recovery, again, a lot of people say, you know, how strong do you need to play hockey? Okay, well, relative to a sport like rugby or maybe Gaelic football, it's slightly different. But for me, when it comes to hockey, your ability to recover is key, and the stronger you are, the better you'll be able to recover. So when we were preparing for what would have been this summer's Olympic Games, the big challenge for us was knowing that we were going to have 8 games in 14 days, and how were we going to be able to be at our best with those demands. So that's what we were preparing for. Rugby, obviously, you've got the contact element of it, so you know your strength and your body mass is your insurance policy really for rugby. In hockey, it's your ability to recover and your ability to bounce back and go game on game. In a club scenario, that might be, you know, your double weekends is probably going to be a big stress point for you. So can you prepare on the Saturday, play on the Saturday and back it up on the Sunday? Your stronger players will generally be able to recover quicker. So that's why we emphasize strength when it comes to hockey. Again, going back to that first column and our aerobic base, we'll talk more on it later on, but it's really, really crucial for hockey. We looked at going to Japan. Heat stress was going to be a big stressor for us. So how are we going to be able to perform in the heat? And like I mentioned already, 8 games in 14 days. So how does that relate to you guys? How can we enhance a club player through utilising S&C? Well, if they're fitter, they'll be able to last the pace of the game, we hope. If they're faster, they'll be able to actually set the pace of the game and put pressure on other teams. If they're able to be fitter and faster, it should fatigue them less, and they'll be able to have clear decision-making processes during the game, not get as flustered. And again, if they're stronger, they'll be able to recover better. Their availability is the best ability, as a good friend of mine likes to say. So if your best player is injured and sitting on the sidelines, it's not much use to the rest of the team. You want to produce all your players, all your squad, a full selection for your head coach. Or if you find yourself in a situation where you are the head coach and you're having to look after the fitness of your squad as well, availability is number one. Also, when it comes to strength, you know, the ability to throw overheads, in that upper body rotational power is pretty crucial. So it's definitely a big transfer in that. I know, again, in recent conversations I've had with hockey coaches, they're looking to push upper body strength to be able to, for their players to have greater ability to deliver push passes on the go, because it's harder to read for defence versus, say, a slap hit. That you can kind of see that coming a little bit more. Guys that maybe aren't as strong rely on their rotational power to use a slap hit, but it's easier to read and maybe easier to intercept. So again, that upper body strength will allow you to push pass a bit harder through. If we look at, again, as a club coach, the first thing you probably do is you get your calendar of matches that comes out. Okay, and this is just something rough I've thrown together, but typically you'll train twice a week, game at the weekend. You'll have a couple of double weekends thrown in there, and you'll have a couple of break weekends thrown in there also. So that's your kind of first protocol when you're planning your season. Big thing I want to talk about tonight is workload and loading. And when we talk about workload, there's two main topics we're going to look at, which is volume and intensity. Generally, what we see is like the intensity of international hockey is quite high, and it's quite a big jump up from where we're at club hockey. That's not my opinion. It's just based off when we look at our GPS data for what is outputted in club games. It's a huge jump up. So what can we do, and how can we measure ourselves more effectively? Most players, if you had a training session or a game or anything at all, and you say, how hard was that? They probably say 7, 8, 9, or 10 out of 10. Okay, but if you look at, again, the chart I've put up here and the definition, okay, so you're saying it was a 7 or an 8 out of 10, but did you have deep and forceful breathing? Were you uncomfortable? Did you not want to talk? Were you not able to hold a conversation? I don't know. I was breathing a bit harder, but it wasn't that difficult, and I was able to hold a conversation. Okay, well, maybe you're back down in a 3 or a 4 in terms of your exertion. So I think one thing we can do is educate ourselves and educate our players on our effort levels, because a lot of the time players just go to default 7, 8, or 9 out of 10, like I was saying, but in actual fact, it could be a much easier session. So if we're very clear on the meaning of these exertion methods as coaches, and we can educate our players, we'll be able to plan our sessions, plan our weeks, plan our matches much better, and we'll start to get control of our workload, and like I say, that volume and intensity. If we go back to our club calendar then and apply that model of workload, okay, and I understand this is probably a little bit silly. You've got an S&C coach telling you how to plan your games. So if anybody does it any other way, just let me know. But you look at your games and you typically say, okay, these are going to be our tough matches. And I've dictated them by marking them in red. And again, typically you're going to work from the game backwards. Okay, where are my really tough games or tough opposition? Or, it might not even be super tough opposition, but the travel or the logistics just makes it a tricky fixture when you encounter all things considered, or like a double weekend. Again, I've put that in as red intensity. So once you get a handle on what your games look like, then you can start to kind of map out the week as well. Okay, and it's not realistic to just be like, we're going to be at 8, 9, 10 out of 10 the whole time in training and games and stuff like that, because that's where burnout will occur, and your players, they'll train hard initially and they might cope for the first couple of weeks. They'll be tired, they'll be moaning, they won't be happy, but they will eventually break down. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to manage the volume and intensity to have spikes where you want, and to have dips where you want. But generally you want to keep it nice, pretty consistent, and just level up or level down rather than having massive fluctuations or massive spikes. Okay, so this helps you then plan your training week. Typically Tuesday night might be a better night to push a little bit harder than a Thursday night, but again, that could be different from one coaching philosophy to another. But it's trying to understand what's going to help you be the best you can be on a Saturday, and looking at it over the course of a couple of weeks and a couple of months. And we'll go into more detail further on. So if we look at a monthly workload example, we look at our team, our intensity, and like I said, our RPE. So typically if you were to team a week or even a session within the week, so if you see the chart here below, we've got week 1, and let's say, for example, that's a red week. So we're going to call that 8 or 9 out of 10 in terms of RPE, effort, exertion. And that doesn't mean every session in the week is red, but you can see the majority of the week is red. So this is a tough week for your players. So Monday, again, I'll go through a more detailed schedule in a couple of slides. But if we call Monday green, Tuesday, maybe typically that's your club training, or if your club trains on a Monday, you can flip those days around. Wednesday, they might just do a lighter day in the gym maybe, or they might go for a recovery jog. It might be a bit of top-up conditioning. It might be some off-feet work on the bike. Thursday then is typically your second club training day. Friday, then you've got a recovery day. There's a big difference between a recovery day and a rest day, okay? And it's important you communicate that with your players. So a lot of players think sitting on the couch watching Netflix is recovery. It's not, okay? That's a rest day. Or at least in my eyes it is. A recovery day is where you're actually actively making an effort to be in a better place tomorrow. And you could say, yeah, by putting your feet up you are, but you're not actually making any effort there. You're just putting your feet up. So again, it's important to distinguish our players the difference between a recovery day and a rest day. And again, we'll talk about recovery later on in the session. You can see there your weekend. I'm skipping ahead. Apologies. So your weekend there's 2 reds. So you could have a double weekend there in terms of club games, or you could have a player that's involved with your team and then maybe involved with a national training day at the weekend, and that's what that would look like. So if you're to look at your fixtures, go back, look at your fixtures, see your games, see where you've got a red weekend or a red match, then you can maybe look back and see, okay, what do I want that week to look like? What do I want the build-up to look like? And manage the volume and intensity that way. For the senior club, a sample week that I've put together, and again, this isn't set in stone, but it's just a loose sample. I'm aware some teams might train Monday nights, some teams might train Tuesday nights, or Wednesday, Thursday, depending, but whatever way to split, the number of sessions tends to be the same. If anybody's schedule is dramatically different to this, and they want to ask questions later, or even we'll give out our contact details afterwards, we'll happily help out and give any advice needed. But if we say, again, working back from Saturday, so our matches at the weekend, what does the rest of the week look like? So Friday, you could have a gym option there, and you see we've got S&C, we've got gym-based S&C 2 to 3 times a week. Now that doesn't mean they're going crazy in the gym on a Friday. That could be just a primer session. It could be something to get them feeling good the day before the game. So it's not going to be anything that is going to take away from their performance at the weekend on a Saturday if it's programmed correctly. And that's what we want. And I suppose that's probably the big fear with coaches. You know, what are my players doing in the gym on a Friday if we've got a game on a Saturday? And they shouldn't be doing anything in the gym on a Friday that's going to hamper their performance. Anything that's there should be there to improve performance. So it might be what we call a primer session, where you're just doing some fast explosive movements to try and get the body primed before the game on the Saturday. And some people will do that on the Friday, some people will do that on the Saturday morning, depending on the time of the game. Thursday then, you look back, that's your club session, typically in the PM. Then we've got S&C pitch base there. So again, that could be in your warm-up. As part of your warm-up, you're doing a little bit of speed work or a little bit of acceleration work. That's no problem at all. It could be that, you know, your players don't have access to a gym or anything like that. So any S&C work you're doing has to be on the pitch, and we'll have examples of that later on. So not having facilities or not having equipment is not an excuse to not run an S&C program. There's plenty you can do with very limited resources. And hopefully we'll help you with some information when it comes to that. Wednesday again, that's an optional gym day. Tuesday, you've got your club session. You've got an option to do S&C on the pitch. Again, that could be conditioning. It could be speed work. It could be anything at all. It could be, again, you don't have a gym, so you're doing your bodyweight workouts as part and incorporating it as part of the workout. Looking down further down the chart, then you'll see recovery. So I've got 7 sessions of recovery in during the week, and that is what, again, I'm gearing that towards what would be best practice. And again, it doesn't take a whole lot to be able to tick one of those boxes each day. We'll give recovery menus later on in the session. I'm aware that not every player is going to buy in and do 7 days of recovery, but we want to promote best practice, and if players want to get the best out of themselves, they'll do that. Or else the other thing that happens is a player gets injured and they realise the hard way that this is the best thing to do. But if we can encourage these habits early on, it'll make a massive difference. And one of the biggest mistakes I see with coaching is, say, for example, a warm-up and a cool-down. And there might be lots of emphasis on the warm-up, and then the cool-down is kind of just, go off there and stretch. And because you belittle its importance, and then all of a sudden it gets done to less and less quality, to the point where it doesn't get done at all. Now, it's fine to say, go off and do your warm down and leave the players a bit of time on their own, and definitely after a game or a training session, sometimes it is nice to just have players, but designate one of your leaders or a player that's, you know, competent to lead the warm-up, so you can have time that, you know, if they want to have a, you know, just a bit of time on their own without coaching staff, they can do that, but the warm down is still being done to good quality. So how you act towards something will kind of verify its importance or lack of importance. Other things I have in there in the week, physio sessions, sleep. Okay, I would like to think that we all sleep every night, but it's important to identify a couple of nights where you're going to really try and bank some sleep, get to bed early, particularly, you know, if it's after a Tuesday session, or it might be a Monday session. I know feedback I've had, a lot of players, when they get home from club training, they might not be home till 9:30, and they find it quite hard to get to sleep that night. So they might get less sleep some nights, which means they need to prioritize it on other nights. And it is something that sometimes you do need to make a conscious effort of. But it's your best recovery tool. You know, we don't make gains when we're training hard. We only make them as we recover. So you can only train as hard as you can recover. If we move on then, an underage sample week, okay, and this is probably going to be a big area of conversation and somewhere that needs a lot of chat to get the best for our players, and particularly putting the player first. Everybody wants a piece of them, the school team, the club team, and then if they're involved with provincial or national setup, you know, everybody wants the player and their program is the most important, but really it's the athlete that's the most important. So how can we all look after the player as best we can? And it goes back to the earlier slide I presented when we're talking about volume and intensity and color coding these sessions to see how hard is the player actually being worked on a given week and on a given day. So for example, let's say if they have a school pitch session on a Monday, they've a tough school game on a Wednesday, then their club wants them down at club training on Thursday, school maybe wants them again for training on a Friday. I can't see my chart here. There we go. And if they've got double commitments then on the weekend, as you can see, so they've got red sessions at the weekend, maybe that's a conversation that could be had, you know, here on Thursday or Friday, that between the key stakeholders, you know, is there something we can do? Is there a bit of wiggle room? Can they cut that training session in half, either at school or at club, to give the athlete a bit more breathing space so then that they can perform better going into that tough weekend that you can see ahead of them. And if you look at your calendar, like we said at the start, and work back from each weekend, you'll start to see these things before they become a problem. And there's no doubt you'll do your calendar out, you'll color code it as best you can, and things will change. The best thing you can have in programming is a rubber, because it's inevitable that things are going to change, but you've got the ability then to be adaptable, and having those conversations to get the best out of the player is going to be really, really helpful. Aideen, Orla, I don't know if you guys want to come in on that. I know, Orla, you've seen it yourself from players with the 21s and then coming into university, the difference there. And Aideen, you're involved in hockey right across the board. So things you might have seen in that underage cohort.
Yeah, definitely. With, you know, especially with girls that have to play school, club, and then probably have provincial or national trainings as well. It's it's so important for you as the coach to understand, you know, what other commitments they maybe have in the week. And understanding, you know, if it's school and you know that they have, like Darren has down there, maybe a Monday, Wednesday, Friday split during the week, but maybe understanding on what weeks that they really need to prioritize those school games, and then having an understanding with the school coach what weeks they maybe need to prioritize club. So it's kind of having those conversations with the school coaches and between the school and club coaches to see how can we compromise, because, you know, if a young schoolgirl is training 7 days a week and maybe doubling up training too much, and like Darren said, not getting that recovery time, they're not going to be able to adapt and perform at their best on a Saturday or on a Wednesday in school when they're needed. So it's being able to have those conversations between you guys and between the coaches to get the best out of the school. So if I was a school coach, to maybe understand that every Thursday I probably don't need, you know, my player to train with me in school, they can train at club, and then I'll go easier on them on a Friday morning, or maybe they don't have to train on a Friday morning, something like that. So yeah, it's really about understanding their weeks and not hammering them too much, so that they get those opportunities to recover, you know, to sleep, not to be training with school and later on training with club, really.
Aideen, and to add yourself?
Darren, we're just struggling with Aideen's mic at the moment, so we'll work on that and see if we can get her freed up. Otherwise, she'll have to use sign language. Okay, continue on there.
There's a question here from Jamie, and something we were going to bring up, so thanks for asking that, Jamie. What are your thoughts or advice regarding school players in Ulster, or indeed the rest of the country, playing Saturday morning and then club Saturday afternoon? Any specific things they could be doing to recover as best they can? And that's, it's not great, but it's the reality of the situation we're in. It's not going to change anytime soon. So you're going, rather than talk about the problem the whole time, let's talk about the solution. So how can we manage the rest of the week knowing that there's going to be this big shift in volume and intensity on a Saturday? And how can we best prepare our players? And it's the job of the school and the club to respect each other and know, okay, we both want the most out of this player each week, but can we develop some sort of communication where, you know, and even if they're not in agreement, if they're just aware to begin with of, you know, if the club coach is aware, okay, they played every minute of the game for their school this morning. Even if he doesn't take it into account, at least he's aware to start off with, and then we can start having more progressive conversations further down the line. And likewise, the school's coach understanding, okay, well, what level are they playing at with the club? Are they playing at their own age grade, or are they playing above their age grade? And correct me if I'm wrong, but what tends to happen if they're playing at their own age grade and they're one of the better players, they'll tend to play more minutes. If they're playing above their age grade, they will tend to play less minutes, but at a higher intensity. And again, like I said at the start, overall in the week, that double session on a Saturday is a big spike. And what we don't like with players is big spikes up or big spikes down. But as I said there, that spike is going to be there whether we like it or not. So what we need to do is prepare the athlete as best as we can for that. So train them for the demands to be able to play 2 games on a Saturday, and then manage their week. So know where are the points where we can push hard, you know, and maybe even in their off season or in the time that the club comes together to train, and they don't have games on a Saturday, like to go from training during the week and no games at the Saturday to all of a sudden into double games. You know, you should be drip feeding them and saying, okay, you've no game this Saturday, but we're going to do some running to prepare you for the volume that's going to hit you in 2-3 weeks time when you do start having your double fixtures. And again, I think the best thing is to just have those conversations with coaches, be aware of what each other is doing and how many minutes each other is playing, and that, you know, knowledge is power, but if you don't have the knowledge, you can't make any decision.
Yeah, and I think, sorry Darren, just as long as if I'm a club coach, when that player turns up, is having that conversation with them, you know, realistically how many minutes they played, you know, how intensive it is in the morning and another game isn't until 5 p.m. It can be quite different to maybe if a game was at midday and the second game was at 3 p.m. So it's again, how much recovery or rest they get in between, checking in, making sure that they've had enough, carbs or nutrition during the day to bounce back from that first game. But again, if I'm a school player that's played, a big hard game on Saturday morning, then I need to be conscious of that school player playing the club game in the afternoon, unless they've built up that robustness to be able for it. Like Darren was saying about building up their fitness level to be able for that. And if I know that they're going to have a double Saturday, then on Thursday in my club session, being conscious of that. And if potentially I need that girl to be quite fresh on the Saturday afternoon after the Saturday morning game, chatting to their school coach, because they maybe have training on Friday morning. So have a chat to them and say, look, we've got them on Saturday afternoon as well after you, and we need them to be playing quite a few minutes. I don't know, it might be that you don't have the luxury of lots of numbers. Then it's having that conversation that, okay, maybe they have to play all of the school game and they have to play all of the club game, but can we compromise on the Thursday and Friday training sessions? So I think keeping up the conversation is really key here around those types of players.
And it's I understand, like, sometimes they're, for whatever reason, thankfully I haven't experienced any of it myself in my dealings with club coaches or anybody like that. Everybody's been great to deal with, but again, remember that everyone's putting the player first, and the thing is to, I suppose, present the facts of what's going on, as in, like Orla saying, these are the minutes played, this is what was done during the week, and hope that the person or try and educate the person if they don't know. Present facts and rather than opinions, because opinions can divide people. But we're all looking for the best out of the player. We've talked a lot about what coaches can do, but then the onus on the player. Then a lot of people will say, the whole argument, are people overtraining or are they under recovering? For a lot of time, a lot of people are under recovering. So if a player like that has a double game on the weekend and they're a young player, are they taking care of their recovery during the week? Are they sleeping enough? Are they staying up too late on a Friday night watching TV, not getting enough sleep before that big game? Are they home from school on a Friday and it's been a long, tough week and they've been studying, but they're eating crap that night before the double game again? These are all considerations that, you're at a fork in the road, and the right decision can really improve your performance come Saturday and enable you to recover between the games. The wrong decision will work against you, and rather than facing up to the fact that there was a lot of bad decisions made during the week in outside factors, you'll blame the fact that there's two games. And like I said, the fact that there's two games, whether it's right or wrong, is not worth discussing, because we're not going to have the power to change that anytime soon. We just have to do what we can to make the best out of it.
And I think a lot of times with the younger players too, sometimes they just don't have enough knowledge yet. So if you have a training plan done for your week, share it with them. Let the players know what you've planned for that week. Training this week is going to be heavy. What do you have on in school? Show them what you've planned at club, or if I'm the school coach, what I've planned at school, and let them take some ownership on how they should plan their week then, around what nutrition they might need on certain days, or how much what they need to pay attention to on recovery for certain days, because they might need to prioritize it depending on if they have a double training, or have that conversation then with you. Well, my school coach has planned a really heavy session that day in school, so I'll come to club training, but I maybe won't train as hard. So give them that ownership as well. Share information with them and trust them to be able to take that knowledge on and to be able to plan their own week too. When we get them into the national program, we're always trying to encourage them to plan as well, and to be able to look after their bodies, look after their schedule, and understand what a high load might look like, and understand, maybe to know themselves when they're doing too much. So I think you as the coach in a club and school setting can help in that by letting them know what the week would look like, and getting them to understand what that load might look like between club, school, and what they're able to manage and where you might need them.
I think as well.
Come back.
Go on, Aideen.
Yeah, no, just I think what's really important, especially with the younger girls, like Orla is saying, is giving them ownership. But also, I think what I've seen, especially with working with kind of 16s, 18s in schools, is that they they kind of feel like they have to do everything, and they kind of like they want to play for the school coach and they want to try and make the national team, and they kind of struggle with just taking that step back. And I think once they're kind of in that setup, or once they start going into that Leinster or Ulster or Munster development spot, it's having that conversation going, okay, you've taken the next step now mentally, and on a high performance side of it, we need to take a step up. And if you are feeling sore, you are feeling stiff, to have those conversations and just put your hand up and say, I can't do the session today, but I'm happy to come out and stand around and be productive in that side.
And when we look at, like, I'm happy to share these slides afterwards, and we'll put together a follow-up resource for anybody that wants it as well, providing a bit more detail and context around these topics that we're talking about. But when we're talking about load, and we're talking about volume, and we're talking about these colour coding sessions, one of the most powerful things we've done in the last 4 years with the senior women's team is to just provide context around the colour coding of sessions, the intensity of, and once you give a colour, once you say red, they know what that means. They know, I need to sleep well, I need to eat well. The knock-on effect it has is huge. Now, the running joke within our team is that every session is a red session. It's just different colours of red. There's no such thing as green. There's no such thing as orange. There's no such thing as blue. And that, you know, they find all the sessions tough. But we know when we plan a session and we plan a week, it's very easy then for players to know what to expect. And like I said, the best way to convince someone to take care of themselves outside of hockey is to just tell them straight up how intense a single session is going to be, and all of a sudden it motivates them to eat better and to sleep better, to take care of their recovery, especially if they see they've got a double weekend or a full red week. Another great motivator for them to work hard and take care of themselves is, you know, for every red week or every red session, there's a blue session of recovery or a blue week of recovery, and they go, right, I'm going to push really hard this week because I know next week we're going to be backing off loads. The other thing is to plan and review. So if you're planning your sessions, and let's say, for example, we'll stick with this underage example of the double session on a Saturday, and you look at that and you go, right, they're going to be 2 super intense games, but all of a sudden the player is so fatigued, or maybe they're just not able to produce the output. And if you were to survey that player after the game, go, right, how hard did you find those sessions? And they said, oh, they were both probably like 4 out of 10. Like there wasn't a whole lot going on with them, or there wasn't opportunities to work hard. Then all of a sudden that day goes from a red to a green, you know. And the big danger is that we have, like Aideen and Orla were saying, if we have lots of sessions, so high volume but low intensity, then we're in trouble. And that seems to be the biggest concern with anybody I've chatted to when it comes to underages. They're playing loads of hockey, but there's not necessarily the intensity there. So there needs to be a bit of give and take. You can't run every session at maximum intensity. If you want to push the intensity one day, you have to pull it back another day. And I understand that's hard when you've got multiple stakeholders. But the first step is to know what you're trying to do, and then have education with the player, have open lines of communication with the other coaches. Again, you don't necessarily have to agree, but if you know what each other's doing, it'll make a big difference. Anything else to add on that, girls, before we move on?
No, I'm happy to move on, Darren.
No. Yeah, move on.
Okay, so typically, if we look at our off season, our pre-season, and our in-season. So in the off season, again, looking at our club players, advice is just to keep moving. Okay, the more you drop off or the less you do, the bigger amount you have to climb when you come back. And again, like we said, the body doesn't like major spikes up in load. It also doesn't like major spikes down in load. Some people might shudder when I say this, but cross training is great, you know, particularly, again, for the most part, the group we're talking about here is amateur athletes. You know, if they get out and play other sports, they may not necessarily be other team sports, but, you know, if it's, you know, that they get big into running over the summer, or they get big into cycling, or maybe it's golf, but keeping up some sort of physical activity, tennis, whatever it is, if we start talking about Gaelic and stuff like that, people might get worried about injuries. But I'd rather somebody keeping fit and cross training over the summer, and if he gets injured, so be it. They could get injured doing anything, than someone sitting wrapped in cotton wool all summer, because chances are when they come back to training, they're going to get injured anyway. In the pre-season, then, that's where we lay our hard work, lay the physical foundations, educate your players again. If you colour code those sessions, show them the weeks that are going to be tough, show them the sessions that are going to be tough, so that they don't spend all day sitting out in the sun and then go, oh crap, it's 6:30, I better go to hockey training. They know days in advance, weeks in advance, they've got a tough session that night for training as part of pre-season. They need to fuel well, they need to hydrate well, rather than turning up to a pre-season session totally under-fueled and totally underprepared, because again, that's an under-injury risk. In season then, like we said, and we went through the example weeks, but every day is an opportunity to do something that's going to work positively or negatively towards your game day. So like I said, the difference between a rest day and a recovery day, everything you do, from a nutrition point of view, everything you put in your mouth is either working for you or against you, and not everybody's going to be perfect all the time. But to get our players thinking a little bit more outside of club training twice a week and club game once at the weekend, every little bit else they can do on top of that is going to make a big difference. If we can educate them as best we can, whether they do it or not is up to them. But we want everybody to have the education and the support to get the best out of themselves and reach their potential. And if that means being a great player at your club and going no further, that's fantastic. If it means being a national player, that's brilliant. But one of the things I love is just to see people making the best out of themselves, and where they end up then is less consequential. I just like seeing a good honest effort and people ticking all the boxes to give themselves the best opportunity. Okay, so if we look at our general season then, and a basic phase plan with limited resources. So how can we incorporate strength and conditioning into the club season, and where does it follow? Conditioning elements sit also our speed and agility elements and plyometrics, and it kind of works from August. We're looking at the most fundamental aspects that we need to start with and build all the way through. And you might look at that and say, oh, you know, geez, there's going to be very little time for hockey there. I'm not talking about doing massive amounts. You could be very limited, but if you're touching on those elements, like I said, it might only be 10-15 minutes of a session. And on a Tuesday, you might prioritize a bit of strength work. And on a Thursday, you might prioritize some speed, agility, and plyometrics work, which can all be done within the warm-up. You know, if you allow 15 minutes for a warm-up, you can very effectively warm up and do your complementary strength exercises within that time. And then your conditioning, you could easily put the onus on the players to do that in their own time, or you could do sessions yourself, again, 10 minutes at the end of training. One thing we like to do is break our sessions up and maybe allow time at the end for individual work-ons. So if we know, typically we'll do our strength stuff in the gym, but if you don't have those resources, you could have 10-15 minutes at the end of a session where players can have individual work-ons, and it's a chance for somebody to do some strength work or conditioning work, speed and agility work, plyometrics, or it could be a chance for somebody to, you know, work on their aerial or work on their slap hit or push pass, whatever it is. Your players that are more physically developed will tend to want to bias that, so it's up to you to get them to develop their hockey skills. And like that, then we all know there's tons of hockey players that are exceptional, that are lacking in physical qualities. So the players are going to bias what they like and what they're good at. And what we want is well-rounded athletes. So when we do individual player reviews, a lot of times I might have a player and I'll say, okay, what do you think you need to work on? And let's say their aerobic fitness, their yo-yo score is 18.5, and they say, oh, if I could get my yo-yo up to 19, that'll really make a difference, you know. But yet they can't throw an aerial. They might not be able to throw an aerial, and they're playing in defence, you know. So you're going, well, which is going to make you a more valuable player on a Saturday? Having that little bit of extra aerobic fitness when you're already in an okay position, or having that aerial threat, you know. So at different times of the season, you'll want to invest your time in other area, in one area or another. But it's trying to develop athletes to be well-rounded rather than them just to keep getting stronger and stronger at what they're already good at. Girls, anything to add on that end?
No, I think you've covered it, Darren.
Yeah.
So, sorry, jumping around here. Okay, so if we look at our performance profiling sample, so again, looking from August through the season, what are the typical performance measures we might look at? I've consciously tried to keep these really, really simple, and look, we use all of these, but what we use, how can it be applied at club level? So first and foremost would be a movement screen, and I would prioritize that among all else. The better our players can move, it opens the door for them to be able to do everything else. If they're limited in a basic movement screen and movement capacity, they're not going to be as efficient a runner. They're probably going to be more likely to be at risk of injury. They definitely will struggle in the gym in terms of confidence of movement. So that's the first kind of box you want to tick. Next off, then you've got their aerobic capacity. I've put in a 16 length time trial there. Again, I mentioned a yo-yo test. We would do both tests. The reason I put the 16 length time trial in is very, very simple to administer. And if you need to, especially over the next couple of months, it's going to be a while before we're all back together on the hockey pitch, you can get your players to administer it themselves. So what it is 16 lengths up and down a hockey pitch. And they just time themselves on that. There is obviously discrepancy between the lengths of one hockey pitch to another. When we test it, if we test it remotely, we'll always note that it was tested remotely. So players are jumping onto different pitches. Basically, we take those scores with a pinch of salt, and it's just to get an idea of where people are at. When we want to do it together, then have the data as hard set and really benchmark people and hold each other accountable against each other. We'll do it on our training pitch at Abbottstown. So everybody's doing it on the very same facility. And again, we'll only compare players to each other when we know they're doing it on the exact specifications the same as each other. 150 meter shuttle, then, that is quite good to work your aerobic capacity. A lot of you might be familiar with that. Very easy to administer. You lay out a 25 meter grid. You can get through quite a lot of players in a small space of time as well. It gives you a lot of good information relative to their anaerobic capacity and their repeat efforts, also their ability to turn over slightly longer distances. What we'll do as well, like I said, I'm kind of just touching on these on surface level, but we will send a backup PDF that will give you more information on all of these should you want it. Muscular endurance, very important for hockey. So there we would look at a maximum split squat isometric. A split squat is basically the bottom position of a lunge, and there's certain protocols where we can time how long you can hold yourself in that position. And a max push-up test, again, it can be discrepancy there. So a good standard I like to use is maybe it's a push-up to a yoga block or something like that. Yoga blocks are standard height. And maybe even get your players to video it or some way of quantity controlling. For power, there's lots of ways to do it. We would usually use a counter movement jump, but a broad jump works quite well. Again, no equipment required if you have just a tape measure. laid out. You can measure it there. Your 505 agility test, again, that's pretty standard. I've got an asterisk beside that one because you may need a strength and conditioning coach to set that one up, or you may need speed gates. So a little bit trickier, but you will see I've prioritized them in order of how important I feel they are towards hockey and how relevant they are versus you know, their accessibility and how easy they actually are to administer. Speed is the same, so we would do typically 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, so we would have a speed gate at each section, so we'll get their splits. If we're limited resources, we might just do 10 meters or 20 meters or 40 meters. Our max strength testing, so we'll typically only test to a 3 rep maximum. I would prioritize the movement screen up above. I would rather a player move well and move competently than be really, really strong, because a really strong athlete is not much use if they can't move well. So just bear that in mind. And then our reactive strength test, we use a 10-5 hop test. Again, that's something that you probably will not utilize unless you've got strength and conditioning staff at your disposal. You'll see I've got some starred then in August in terms of what tests would be applicable to do straight away to get a baseline measure of your squad. And a lot of these we will probably do, we'll get our squad to do remotely before we get them back together, so we have an idea even of where players are at and where our squad is at before we undertake our first training session. So again, if we know generally what sort of scores our squad are getting in terms of their aerobic fitness, their strength and their power, we will know, okay, how hard we can push them in training. Rather than bringing them in on the first weekend, training them really hard, all the players then breaking down or not being able to recover to play again or train again the following weekend, it doesn't leave us much use. September then, you'll see we've got another battery of tests. And again, if you're doing, I understand like time is limited and the resources are limited, but if you aim to knock off one profile testing a week at training, you know, there's plenty of players that can turn up to training early, or you can test them all as a group, you know, something like the 16 length test, depending on how fit your squad is, will take you less than 6 minutes, you know, after your warm up and training to do, and you get a lot of very valuable information. So you'll see what I've ranked test first, what I've ranked test then in September, and push on through. What exercises would you include in your 3RM testing is one of the questions we've had, and I know we've had previous questions before that. I'm not ignoring them, but I will come to them because I know the slides are coming up. In terms of our 3-rep max testing, we will get them to do a squat to parallel. Depending on the player, it'll be either a back squat or a front squat. We'll also do a trap bar deadlifts. We will do bench press. We will do a weighted chin up. There are our fundamentals, yeah. Warm-up ideas. So, Jonathan, I think this is your question, yeah. So, if you look at your warm-up, the sign of a really good warm-up to me is that the players don't know when the warm-up starts and finishes, because it just has a smooth transition, okay? There's certain things that I like to do consistently, and I think it's good for players to do consistently because they can then assess, compared to the norm, how they feel. Do they feel better? Do they feel worse? Do they feel tighter? Anything like that. Or I'll probably pass this one over to you, seeing as this is your fantastic body of work that you've put together.
Yeah, I think, you know, with warm-ups, there's so much that you can get out of it. So one thing that I try and stick with is warm-up is generally done every time before a gym session, before a pitch session. And if you're in a club setting or a school setting, you generally just have your pitch sessions, and why not then utilize the warm-up to get consistent exposure to certain exercises. So the way that I would generally, you know, map it out if I was doing a pitch session is obviously get the heart rate going, with a lot of, you know, some jogging, some S runs, and things like that, just to get the heart rate up. Then use the time to go through some movement patterns that are quite applicable to hockey, and then use it to help go through those movements that are going to help prevent injury. So, for example, in the orange boxes there, you'll see mobility and activation. So a lot of movement prep around using the glute muscles, using the hamstring muscles, using the lower back and some of the core there as well. Just some important areas that you need for hockey. And if we can be consistently hitting those target areas, if we're training twice a week and have a game, so that's 3 exposures a week to those, then it's a hell of a lot better than just jogging around a pitch, especially if I've got players that maybe don't have access to a gym, maybe don't have access to S&C coaches. But if I can get them through some good movement patterns 3 times a week and consistently doing that well, then you're doing a really good service for them. Down in the blue box then and the yellow box. So the blue box is all that injury prevention and stability work, so around looking after the knees, the ankles, hips, that type of thing, where we're doing some landing exercises. So a lot of it works in a single leg, so hopping and landing on one leg in a forward plane, same going side to side, some balance tasks. And again, going through the likes of these, so whatever many reps it is, or 2 or 3 rounds, it's only going to take a few minutes. So it's not like it's going to take your entire session. And then moving on into the yellow one is where, like what Darren talked about earlier, on that kind of power development, and even getting into some kind of speed and acceleration work then just before we get into the session. And again, if we can be consistent in creating a warm-up that the girls can get used to and consistently have those good exposures to, then you'll see over time that they'll just get better and better and a lot more robust in those injury prevention places. But then again, with their acceleration, with their push-offs, with their drives, and the thing about a warm-up, I think a lot of people get hung up on how it has to be creative and that, we have to keep it varied to keep them interested. But I don't mind how varied or less varied it is, as long as we're consistently giving them good exposures. So if I'm always varying up my warm-up, but they're not really getting much out of it towards their performance, then how effective is it, or what benefits are they getting from it? So if I'm not going to change my warm-up that much, but I know that the exercises that they're doing is preparing them for the session, but also getting them to hit those priority areas around the glute, the hamstrings, the hip, back, particularly for hockey, and then going through those injury prevention and possibly some acceleration and speed work, then I think I'm doing them a better service than, even if you've got players that can't get into a gym. So just something to think about at club level. It's a really, really important place and really important time that you can stress a lot of this work with them. And this document as well, sorry, the warm-up ideas, this is part of a bigger document that we're hoping to send out to the clubs, and this page with the green, the orange, blue, yellow, that's something that we're hoping all the club coaches will get. So you'll have this document to give you ideas of things that you can put into your warm-up.
And even like that, yeah, Orla, you've done great work putting that document together, and there's more of that material in the next couple of slides. But also, I'm conscious when you look at that on the page, there's a lot of information, and some of it is stuff that you might have no understanding of what the world's greatest stretch means, or what open closed gates means. But we'll back that up with video resources. The document Orla has put together as well does have a lot of it's got picture examples and stuff. But if we can build our YouTube channel that we started developing with resources for you to watch and take the intimidation out of, if you're saying, listen, I'm a hockey coach, I teach people how to play hockey, I don't teach this sort of stuff. Try and take the intimidation out of it for you and make it as easy for you to administer as we can. Also, one of the practical elements of it, like, you might be watching, if you look down in the yellow box there, some of the potentiation movements, pogo hops, broad jumps, counter movement jumps, partner knee touch, whatever it is. If you're not comfortable demonstrating an exercise to the group, identify a player that is competent in the exercise and say, pull them out and say, right, Sean is going to demonstrate how to do a broad jump, so the players are a really good example of how to execute it, and they know how to follow it. Mistakes I've made in the past is when I first got involved in 2016 with the team. Again, this is something that I wanted to implement, but at best I was getting access to them once a week on a Sunday on a pitch session, and I'm going, you know what, if I'm only guaranteeing, and the reason I wanted to do it was more so for the intricacies around the warm-up and the complementary strength and conditioning work that can be done. So there was no doubt they were warming up when they were doing their club sessions and this, that, and the other, and when I wasn't seeing them. But I wanted to guarantee more in terms of the blue box and the yellow box that you're seeing down there, the injury prevention and stability and the potentiation, and also some of the mobility and movement prep, particularly in terms of movement patterns that will cross over into influencing speed work. What I wanted to do was I sacrificed maybe 10 minutes at the start of the gym sessions I had. So I had 2 gym sessions a week. And then if I was lucky, I got to see them on Sunday on the pitch. So I said, right, well, if I wait till every Sunday to expose them to this type of stuff, it's going to be a long time before we see progress. So what I did was incorporated it into the gym. So I started off and we'd start each gym session, we'd wait till everybody was there and we would do a group dynamic warm-up, and the girls would say, like, what are we doing a pitch warm-up inside the gym? And I'd say, you're in the gym, this warm-up isn't necessary for you guys to go and lift weights and do the strength and conditioning we've got programmed, but it's necessary for you in the overall scheme of the week and the overall scheme of you becoming a better athlete. So we're trying to be better hockey players, not just be better in the gym. So actually sacrificing time from our lifting to work on these movement skills. So then rather than having 1 exposure a week, we got 3 exposures a week. Now, the mistake happened and I didn't recognize it soon enough was when we got more resources and more funding and our success at the World Cup, and we got more access to the players, and we kind of started going to a 3-day week and eventually a 5-day week. And we're pretty much a full-time program now. Albeit without the resources, or I kept it in my gym sessions, even though I was now seeing them maybe 3 to 5 times a week on the pitch. So I just from having my head down and not taking my head up out of the clouds to see what was going on, I just kept doing it because I was always doing it. And then I realized, you know what, I'm actually getting the exposures that I never had. So that was a mistake I made. Another thing is, again, you might have all these elements in on a training day, or, you know, you might douse your warm up with a little bit of speed work or acceleration work at the end of it, to get those strength and conditioning components in while you're on the pitch. But on the game day, then maybe you need to strip it back again to save their energy for the game. So, you know, if you're doing a really comprehensive 15-minute warm up during your midweek training session that incorporates some strength and conditioning, maybe that's not needed on the Saturday session for the game. And you just leave players to feel a little bit more fresher going into the game. Anything else you want to add on that, Orla or Aideen?
No, happy.
All good.
Players will always want to do less in a warm-up, but it's for you to convince them and explain the why and the buy-in, and they will see the benefits of it. Again, if you don't put much stress on the warm-up and say, players, go and take your own warm-up and do whatever you want, and then 2 minutes later you shout at them to start sticking ball, you're belittling the importance of the warm-ups, and then the players won't take it seriously either. Again, another thing, when I started, I pushed them pretty hard in the warm-up because it was a chance to, we warmed them up comprehensively, but again, that might take anywhere between 7 and 10 minutes, and then that extra 5 minutes is my chance to do on-field strength and conditioning. And again, that could come in the mode of on-field conditioning, speed work, acceleration work, agility, anything at all. So putting that in, and players found it quite tough initially, but again, you're explaining it to them that this is now part of the warm-up, and we don't see it. At that time, we weren't in a full-time program, so we didn't get dedicated time to work on movement skills, or we didn't get dedicated time to work on fitness as a group, or speed work as a group, because our time was valuable. The hockey coach needed it. So we did push quite hard. And again, players sometimes didn't know when the warm-up started and the session finished, but to me, that's a good sign. Example here. So when we do our speed work in the warm-up, this is from a couple of years ago in Spain. I don't have time to coach one-on-one and give individual feedback and individual cues during a warm-up, but videoing sessions and getting them to do, say, a waterfall start. So this particular drill, we were concentrating on leg drive over the first 3 steps, and videoing it like this. Hopefully this will play for you. So concentrating on leg drive, concentrating on arm drive, good body angles. Sorry, Wilson slipping. Okay, so really useful. It didn't take any more time. It didn't drag out the warm-up at all. But off the back of that video now, I'm able to watch back and sit down with a pen and paper and make notes on each individual player and give that to them then afterwards. So again, I would do a lot of that. Orla, if you want to speak on, again, the resistance training exercises that you've put together as part of the Hooked for Life document and some of the progressions. Again, it's much more comprehensive in the Hooked for Life, but this is just a little sample of it.
Yeah, so so the warm-up ideas, that page is part of an overall document that includes some resistance training exercises as well. So it's part of the soon to be upgraded Hooked for Life document, and there's obviously a lot more detail than just this slide that you're seeing, and it's still only in a draft version, but the aim is to send out a resistance training pack essentially to each of the clubs and schools, and it just details through primary movements and then advancing movements, with the aim that you try to teach your players, and particularly the younger players, the primary movements, and when they get some mastery in that, you can move on to the more advancing movements. So each page will go through, level 1, level 2, and level 3 of each exercise. So if you look at the 6 primary movements, so we'll take the top one. So the goblet squat, so the level 2 is generally the exercise. And then level 1 is an easier version of that, so a body weight squat. And then level 3, a split squat or a single leg squat, is the more difficult version. And on each page, these are all described. There's teaching cues. So if you're a coach that maybe isn't sure what a goblet squat or a bodyweight squat will look like, there's pictures on each page to highlight what they look like, as well as descriptors on how you carry them out. There's also boxes on the pages to give you an idea of, how many reps you should be completing, and for each age group, what that might look like and how you would progress the player on. And the whole idea of this is that you don't need a lot of equipment for it, and you don't need a gym for it. It's just an idea that, for 10-15 minutes of every training session, that you might prioritize, whether that's at the start or the end, to doing a little bit of resistance training. Then at least exactly same idea as what I was saying in the warm-up one, if we're getting that consistent exposure to these exercises, then you're going to have a lot of improvements for your athletes, particularly in the strength circle and as well in the injury prevention side of it. Because like Darren talked about it at the start, the stronger that they are, the better able they are to recover, and the less likely then they are to get injured. So this is just literally just an introduction to give you an idea of the document that we're trying to put together to send out to the clubs, to give you an idea of the types of resistance training, that you can do on the pitch. They don't need a gym, they don't need equipment, and it gives you that idea of, depending on the age group, what it could look like.
I think that if there's one thing that this whole scenario we're in at the moment, with the pandemic that's going on, has taught us, is that you've got to be resourceful with very limited equipment or limited resource or limited access. And I don't think it'll be an excuse anymore to not have a gym, because plenty of people have been in that scenario the last couple of weeks. And maybe, they said, for 2 weeks, I just won't do anything. And then they say, well, this thing doesn't look like changing anytime soon, so I better just get on with it and do what I can. If that's just body weight, that's absolutely fine. Consistency is going to be the biggest thing that will yield results. So if you've got all the best facilities in the world, but you're not consistent with your training, it's no use. If you've got very limited resources, but you're consistent with your training, you've got good, solid foundations in your program, exactly like what's in front of you there, you'll do really well. If we look at one of the best sports teams in the world, the All Blacks, they've no training base. There's no All Black high performance center, but what they do have is really good fundamentals, really good movement skills. They stick to the basics and they just execute the basics really, really well, no matter where they are in the world or no matter what sort of gym they're in. And they're always top performers. Chris, you had a question. How are you planning the season, given the situation that we don't know when competition is going to return and training, practices, resources are limited, and that a large portion of the non-international playing population will be in reduced activity for an extended period of time? It's a great question. It's very relative to what's going on at the moment. Nobody really has, I don't have any more answers than anyone else when it comes to when we'll be back training, or even at the moment, whether you're an international athlete or not, there's no difference. We're not getting any special preference, and we're not being allowed back on the hockey pitches or in the gyms anytime sooner than anyone else, unless that's changed since this morning, but that was the last update I had. So what you've got to do is, if we go back to when we talked about the off season And for your players, the key thing is not to do nothing. Like, keep yourself in the mix, keep yourself ticking over. It is tough at the moment because it's harder for some players to motivate themselves when they don't know when there's a start date or anything like that. But again, the more they drop off now, the bigger the mountain to climb is going to be going back. There's all sorts of crazy challenges going on online. Some are good, some are awful, and some are really progressive and some are really detrimental to players, which is why I stay off social media a lot of the time. But just to keep your players in the mix, find out what their motivation is. Sometimes their motivation might be, like, for example, we had a couple of weeks off when the Olympics was postponed. We're training at the moment, and we're just training within the confines of what we've got. And some players have access to, they might have full gyms in their house, and some players have nothing. So you're trying to train as best you can with what you've got. Some players live next door to, a pitch or a park where they've got lots of space to run around, and some players have nothing but hilly roads to run on. And you've just got to make the best of the scenario, knowing that on your return, when your team gets back to training, like I said, we're going to do some remote profiling and testing of our players to see where they're at before we bring them all back together, and that will help us to train them more effectively when they come back. Some girls in the past have struggled when they've time away and they come back into the program because, like I said, the body doesn't like massive spikes in intensity, and typically they've maybe got injured when they come back to the intensity of national training. So their motivation for training now is to be able to have a seamless integration back when the squad comes together. Aideen, you might be able to jump in on that from a loading perspective.
Yeah, I think we're quite lucky in regards to that, with obviously the increase in funding and the increase in the girls' performance, that we are now able to provide the girls with a GPS unit and heart rate monitors to wear, and they keep those, and they're fully responsible for them. Although it does give me heart palpitations every now and then when I know how much they are and how much the girls are responsible for them. But we're quite lucky in that regard. But I think even just with all these resources that we're giving out is to just sit down, and myself, Darren and Orla, like, I'm sure we'll all be able to give a dig out if anyone has any questions. Just before, when we start to get an idea of when the season is coming back, just map it out and give the girls or guys some information in regards to not panic that they're coming back into training, because what you'll find with amateur players is that they'll go, oh my god, I'm back to training next week, I better go and start running 10Ks every day to make sure I'm not behind. I think it's really important just to feed that back and maybe map out some sessions, whether it's on a Saturday. Club players typically run in and around 5 to 6, and then some of the international girls being on the pitch for 70 minutes could run up to 10K. It's to just map that out and go, right, on a Saturday, let's try and do a bit of a more of a high volume run. Thursday, let's try and break it up into intervals and just map it out that way, and just build them up slowly, because like Darren said, we don't want to increase the load too soon, because if we do, we'll just see a spike in load, and it won't be straight away that they'll see it. It'll be 3 or 4 weeks down the road when you approach your first club game. So I think for that is definitely just plan it out. I don't know if we'll be going back anytime soon. More than likely it'll probably go back to being just like a regular club season. But just planning that out and letting the girls know or the guys know that don't go hell for leather straight away. Just build it up slowly and avoid that risk as much as we possibly can.
It's also a really good opportunity this time. Like when we looked at the layout of the season, in one of the earlier slides, you had the Christmas break. And I know for a lot of our players, we would push them quite hard physically around that December block. And they're saying like how nice it is to be out running now when it's not hailstones in your face and it's not lashing rain and there's actually a bit of sun, and it's a lot more enjoyable to get out and run. Again, with the limited circumstances that everybody's confined at the moment, it's a really good opportunity to work on just that aerobic base fitness. And again, that was one of the primary things we identified that a player needs to have in terms of their strength and conditioning to excel at hockey. So you know, it's a great opportunity for them to work on that base without not saying hockey is a distraction, but they can solely work on that, so that the more time they invest in it now, the more time they can invest in their hockey when it comes back to getting on a pitch, and there's no time wasted. And you guys as coaches, like, your season was cut short, so you probably feel hard done by then, and you know, at best you'd hope your season is going to start as scheduled, but I'm sure you're dying, just like you probably don't want to spend any time doing S&C. When you get back, you want to get straight into the hockey because you've been deprived at that time. So again, that might be a motivator, you know, convince the players, listen, if you can take care of this kind of physical preparation stuff with the best advice and just do the basics and be consistent, we can actually get on with playing games sooner when we get back and spend more time playing hockey. One of the questions we've had was, does the warm-up depend on the colour of our training session that evening? So we talked about having colour-coded training sessions. Would we match our warm-up to that? Absolutely we would. So quite often we, again, looking at what is done at international level and applying it back down to club level or school level indeed. Myself and Aideen would regularly sit down with our head coach and talk about the content of the training session. We plan the training session from a loading point of view, so we'd know it's going to be a red session or it's going to be an orange session. If it's going to be a red session, what's making it a red session? Is it lots of short bursts of really high intensity, or is it a red session because it's going to go on for 2.5 hours? And we would understand the context. We would look at the order of the drills. So what drills are they going into straight away after my warm-up? And I'll know by the drills how primed they need to be. So do they need to be ready for maximal velocity running, so top speed running straight away, you know, 20 minutes into the start of the session, which is my warm-up 15 minutes. So 5 minutes after my warm-up, they're going to be at top speed and they're going to be getting flogged. That means my warm-up needs to be really comprehensive, but also, if the head coach is going to be really fatiguing them, I want to get them to a point where they're going to be safe to train, but I don't need to create any extra fatigue in my warm-up. So absolutely, the warm-ups would depend on the colour of the session. Also, the players we'd always communicate, and they'd have the training plan and they'd know what colour session it is. But I, again, will always reiterate that, because a player could be going through the motions in a warm-up, and despite our best efforts, that's just what happens sometimes. But all of a sudden, again, you remind them this is going to be a red session, and straight out the block, you know, we're doing 8v8 small-sided games. Again, that pricks their ears, and all of a sudden they're a little bit more diligent in their stretching and their activation and the preparation work before the training session occurs. So thanks for that question, a really good question. Question from Killian. So, any advice on how to work with underage players that are also playing other sports and might have conflicting training schedules and strength and conditioning programs? So that's a great question, and it's very pertinent across the board. I think the thing that everybody has to remember is to put the athlete or player first, and try and have open lines of communication among the different sports coaches, or this, that, and the other. And like I say, that doesn't mean you have to agree. It'll be great if we all did. But as long as you're aware of what other people are doing, you know, knowledge is power, and you can do more with that information and make better decisions yourself. When it comes to an S&C program, and this is what we're trying to develop here with the document that Orlaith has put together and we're presenting snippets of tonight, is, you know, as long as the player is getting good fundamental S&C development, whether it's coming from the school or the club or, you know, international, it doesn't really matter, as long as the kid is getting what they need. And we'd have situations where, you know, you might get speaking to other coaches in Hockey Ireland that look after a junior age grade teams, like you might have a 16-year-old and they're coming in to do a gym session, and they come in and they say, oh, well, they did a gym session the day before at their school. So how can we best mitigate that, or how can we open up that line of communication with the school and go, okay, so we don't want the same thing here, but we're fighting for it individually. How can we work together? And what have you got in your program? This is what I've got in my program. Okay, so if they're doing that on your day with school, what can I do with them when they come in to me? So if they're doing a school strength and conditioning session on a Monday and they're doing you know, a club or a national training session on a Tuesday? Can those two people talk to get the best out of the player? Because a lot of the times when you actually have those conversations, we're all after the same thing. But the main problem is communication. That's where it falls down a lot of the time. Orla, you might be able to jump in on that from your experience.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you know of girls that are, or boys even, that have a couple of S&C programs maybe going at the same time, or they're training with different teams, again, having that conversation with them. If I'm a club coach or a school coach and I know maybe they're part of a national team, or they're part of, it could be Gaelic football team, and they're doing some S&C there, you know, be conscious that if they're already getting it somewhere else, don't doubt that it probably is enough, and it's what they probably should be doing. So maybe if it was my warm-up or my part of the training where it's based on resistance training, then what I would do is, if I know they're getting it somewhere else, then give them that time to maybe spend on some stretching, or maybe it's some hand-eye coordination skill work that's not too fatiguing, but maybe they don't need to get that extra S&C stuff. So just being conscious of how many times a week do they get that exposure to it. If they're getting it in another sport or in a different program, then that's okay. You don't necessarily have to focus on it or make them do your one in your training session. So just being aware of that, being conscious of it, and maybe having some alternatives there if that is the case.
Yeah, and try and remove as much ego as you can, you know. And if you're dealing with someone that is difficult and they're adamant, you know, no, they're going to follow the school S&C program and that's the way it is. And whether you agree or disagree, recognize it for what it is and go, right, I'm not going to be able to change this person's opinion, but what I can do is change what I'm going to do with the athlete, so they're getting a more well-rounded week, or they're getting a balanced week. Or like Orla says, you know, okay, well, they're going to, you know, kind of forcefully and uncooperatively deliver their strength and conditioning program. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend my time really working on good recovery principles with the player. I'm going to really teach them how to assess their own week and assess their own load, because ultimately with these players, we want to educate them so that they've got the information and they have good principles, and when they walk away from our program or walk away up to the next age grade, they've taken what they've learned from us and they still apply it. We don't want players that are just robots and are just doing what they're told the whole time. You want them to educate them, and for them to make the right decisions themselves. This is a sample gym session that we would typically do with the senior women's team. So if we start at the start, preparing to perform, so they'll fill in a wellness document, just giving us an idea on how they slept, have they got soreness in their body, their diet, their nutrition, a whole range of things, so we can get a picture of where they're at. MSK, again, this is all on an app. We use Kitman Labs, so they can mark where it's sore in the body. Again, physios can identify that and maybe see, you know, like they've been reporting that lower back soreness now for a couple of days, and it was a 2 out of 10, now it's a 4 out of 10, now it's a 6 out of 10, so I need to see what's going on there. Or me, from a gym point of view, I might be able to modify what they're doing based off what I see on that. They'll come in and like Orla explained earlier on, part of the warm-up is that injury prevention, and again, the dynamic stuff that we would add in. So again, we might, depending on how much access to them, you might try and filter that stuff into the gym-based warm-up, or if you're getting lots of access to them on the pitch in a different time, you might not. The plyometrics and power, again, you'll have seen this in Orla's presentation, or the resistance training components she put together before, some speed and agility work. Okay, so if we're to look at all this in our gym session, this is probably what the first 25 minutes or so looks like, okay? And so far we haven't lifted a weight. So this is all stuff that could be done on the side of a pitch with no weightlifting equipment, and make a massive difference to your players and your athletes. Now we're into the strength component, and again, this is a little bit more advanced, but like Orla said, if you're stripping that back to the body weight options, again, on the side of a pitch with no resources, that's excellent. Off-the conditioning, there's times where we might do 5-10 minutes of bike work or getting on the rower or whatever it is as an extra conditioning method to really work the lungs but not impact the joints. That was something they were big on in Australia and AFL, because they do a massive amount of running, a massive amount of distance, but they're still trying to push their aerobic fitness and their anaerobic fitness without impacting physically the body, if that makes sense. So that was something that they really pushed hard over there, and I've kind of made it a fundamental of my program that I push it quite hard myself. On-feet conditioning then. So at times of the year you might do, again, 10 minutes of on-feet conditioning at the end of a session, at the end of a gym session, or as an extra on a night that you're not club training, the players just take the responsibility to go and do it themselves. A single session of it won't make much of a difference, but 10 minutes twice a week, every week, will make a huge difference. And then our mobility to finish off. That's generally the sequence and the order of how we would follow that. So again, you can see it's you can take the elements and apply them yourself on the side of a pitch without much hassle. Orla, this is your lovely cake that you've baked, so I'm gonna pass this one back over to you.
Yeah, just back to this document again. That's not ready, but we hope to have out to you guys soon. So I just kind of use the idea of a cake analogy just to help people to understand when we talk about fitness that there's different elements to it and kind of how you would approach it. So if it's a layered cake, so you've got the bottom layer, the middle layer, and the icing, you can't get the icing, which is your A cells, D cells, and change of direction, which is obviously hugely important in a hockey game. We can't try to tackle that or perfect that until we have a good aerobic base. So the bottom of that cake is that aerobic fitness, and to try and start with that and push that first. Once we are competent and build a good endurance capacity in that, then you can start to move into your anaerobic, so that middle cake layer, and then into your axel. So the aerobic fitness kind of being that general physical preparation, so the general fitness, and then moving up to the icing, which is very specific, which is looking at your A cells, D cells, change of direction, and that can be got through drills, it can be got through small-sided games, and your 4v4, that type of thing. So just examples of it is where, if it's aerobic, it's your longer duration runs. So whether you're getting them to run for 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and repeating those efforts, giving them some rest as well. The anaerobic then is where it's much smaller, it's shorter. So you've got shorter reps, a few more efforts. So your aerobic session might last a little bit longer. Your anaerobic session might not last as long, but it's definitely completed at a much higher intensity. And then when we have a good anaerobic fitness base, then we can move into our short, sharp, quick accelerations, decelerations, changes of direction. And that's what's really going to make a difference to our game. But to be able to repeat them over and over again, we need to have good anaerobic and good aerobic fitness. Now, in the document that we have put together, I've got outlines of what those sessions might look like, how many reps you might include depending on the fitness level or the ages of the players, what the work to rest ratios might look like. So if we're going to do this many reps, if the reps are going to be this duration, what the rest might look like. But just to kind of get, just for now, the idea across that, we want to be able to develop that aerobic fitness first. So don't skip straight to the sprints. Don't be skipping straight to that fancy stuff if we don't have that general fitness built as well. And the one good thing about this time, I think, the fact that we have time to spend on that, it's a good time to really try and build up that aerobic endurance and build up our capacity for that, especially when it is so important for hockey.
That ties back to Chris's question earlier around, how are we planning the season and stuff. That aerobic base is essential. So if we find out tomorrow, where are we, 25th of May, if we find out tomorrow that we're going back first week in July to play games, that's great. And some of us will go, yeah, brilliant. And some of us will go, particularly Aideen will go, oh shit, we don't have enough time to prepare the players for what we need and for the demands of what they're going to experience on that first weekend of hockey. So that's where, if your players can be doing as much of this aerobic fitness and building that base as well as they can now in their own time, it enables you then, when you do your 16 length test or whatever profile measure you choose to use, you come back and you go, do you know what, they're all actually really ticking this box, except for you and you. So you can kind of maybe move on to your anaerobic stuff if people are at a certain level of competence when they come back again, but you can't move on unless that base is built. So that's a good motivator to your players
And a big thing as well, just, and I know Darren, you probably mentioned it earlier on, if we've got high aerobic fitness levels, we're generally quite good at recovery in between those sprints. So when we get to move on to our anaerobic stuff, then it's easier for the players to recover between bouts, and especially in the game, if they make a sprint or a dash with the ball, and it comes back, 10, 20 seconds later, they can base. So using this time to hammer that message home to players is probably good, and it doesn't mean they need to go out and run 10, 20k tomorrow, but to build that up and to build up that aerobic fitness level, so when they get back into hockey, being able to work on that repeat sprintability is it's really important to have that aerobic base there. And also just a note on the slide there, I just noticed there's a spelling error. The middle one there should be anaerobic, just in case anybody's getting confused. So aerobic down the bottom, anaerobic in the middle. Sorry, Darren, work away.
Yeah, that's my bad. Okay. Recovery. So Shirley McKay, our most capped player, and good reasons for it. She is very, very diligent. You can only train as hard as you can recover. She'll never tell you she's doing it or whatever, but you'll be in a hotel, and generally I would be an early riser, but generally most mornings I'm an early riser. I'm up when I go down to the hotel gym or whatever. She's already there, stretching or on a bike, doing whatever. We might have a game. Again, she'll be in there afterwards on a bike, loosening out or doing whatever recovery method it is, and just quietly goes about her business, but gets it done every time to the highest standard. And it's no coincidence that she's our most capped player. When you look at game day, here in the red marks, you'll see again what we increase injury risk, we increase inflammation, increase disrupted sleep, mental stress, oxidative stress, glycogen depletion, muscle damage. So recovery has to come in to take care of it. Now, half of this is blocked on my screen. Let me see if I can make this around. Yeah, lovely. There we go. So again, you can see the different elements that go into recovery: mental, physical, nutrition, sleep. We will send this around. Take a screenshot if you don't want to wait for it to be sent around. But again, it just helps you to appreciate what it takes to balance that scales. And it goes back to at the start of the conversation, those schools players that have that double game on a Saturday, that's not going to change. But are we getting this side of the scales right to enable them to perform for those two games on the weekend? Another example is recovery strategies where you have a 100-point system. So you've got different methods of recovery. So compression garments, cold water therapy, it could be a hot or cold shower, pool recovery session, just monitoring your hydration, or either through the color of your urine or the changes in your body weight, athlete self-monitoring, massage, manipulation, nutrition, and working on your points. So the idea being you want your player to accumulate 100 total points. Now, a lot of places, a lot of teams, elite teams will look at 100 points in the 24 hours post the training session or post the game. I think realistically for our club players, if we could say that all our club players are accumulating 100 points in a week, that would be a good starting point. And then when that becomes the norm, we can maybe increase the demands on them. Or again, when you look at those double weekends or tougher games or tougher training sessions, emphasize how important it is to prep for the session in terms of your nutrition, your hydration, your activation, your warm-up, your sleep, but then also preach how important it is to recover. Every Tuesday night when a player, Monday or Tuesday, whatever your first training session of the week is, and you've always got those players that are dragging their heels in and they're complaining, oh, I can't believe we're training, I'm knackered from the weekend. Again, that's a classic case of are they overtraining or under recovering? And you can be guaranteed that, if they're schools players, they were probably up late on Saturday and eating crap and whatever else like that. If they're a little bit older, it could be nights out or whatever it is, but there's no excuse for arriving to Tuesday training still dragging your heels. You're definitely under recovered. So again, putting the onus on players, and I think having an expectation that's achievable, like this one here, where you're asking for 100 points within the week, is a good starting point. And then, you let your players take it from there. Okay, do we want to agree as a player group that we can achieve this after each game? So maybe you're looking at 200 points in a week, 100 general points and 200 points specifically after a match. And so that's just some ideas around recovery. Didn't mean to do that. So looking at high performance, what does it look like? It's more about setting standards and budgets, have solid principles and build from that. Like I said at the start, we're looking to prepare, perform and recover mentally, physically, on the field and off the field. So lots of people will use it as an excuse, that we're lucky that, we've got GPS units and we've got someone like Aideen, but people will say, oh, well, we can't monitor load because we don't have GPS units. I could hand you a case of GPS units tomorrow, and if you don't have the right person to look after it, it's absolutely useless. So I know myself, I can, operate GPS units, I can download them, I can upload them, all that sort of stuff, but I can't interpret them to even 10% of the quality of what Aideen can do. So the quality of what we get is what is in what she delivers. So get really, really good at using the basics and the bare minimums, and I think that's something that we've all got used to the last couple of weeks. And once you've got that nailed, just add layers on top of that and on top of that, and be consistent in everything that you do. Girls, anything to add there?
No, I think you said it there. Like, obviously, clubs and schools may not have access to GPS, but Darren went through the RPE earlier. He went through the colour codes. Using the likes of that is really simple, really effective ways of managing load. Yes, if you have GPS, you can do all the wonderful things that Aideen can do and monitor absolutely everything that they do and really look after the range of prevention. But being simple and looking after the basics can really help in managing the load. And talk to the players, understand when they're fatigued, understand when it's too much for them, just by having that conversation as well.
Yeah, and just to kind of follow up on that, it's something that I think myself and Darren have always kind of reflected on, is that we both came in at the same time. I obviously stepped away for a year or two and worked with the 21s in Valencia a few years ago. But I think what myself and Darren would always look back on is when we originally came in, we didn't have all this stuff. We were 16, 18 in the world, didn't have GPS units, didn't have heart rate monitors, and we just stuck to the basics. RP, how are you feeling? Having those conversations, because like the guys have said, it's all well and good having GPS, but at the end of the day, having those conversations on, are you tired? Yeah, okay, right. How was your recovery? What have we done? Like, everyone who's on this chat is well able to go and look at a session and go, actually, yeah, that was really tough, and knowing to maybe pull back the following day. So just because you don't have all the equipment doesn't mean that you can't strive for greatness. I think we've kind of looked at that and progressed forward, and as funding increases and as opportunities arise, yes, there is an opportunity for you to go and get more equipment, but doing the basics is so important. And I think we've kind of always said that, like, yeah, GPS and heart rate can monitor everything from how many steps you do on your left to how many steps you do on your right, but if I was to share my GPS report with you, it's so simple, and we would always strive to monitor the simple as opposed to the complex. So just taking the simple things of how hard was that session, what's your muscle soreness, how's your sleep, is so important, and it's stuff that we still do to this day.
And don't be afraid to we push our players really, really hard, but it's really considered, and we push them hard and we know when to pull back. Now, our players might not agree with that, but we do. So don't be afraid to push your players hard, but just know everything around what you're doing. Don't just push them hard blindly, or don't just do 2-hour sessions at a moderate intensity 3 times a week. Look at it and say to your players, listen, if you give me the right intensity in this session, we're going to be back in our cars in 60 minutes, okay? And you get a short, sharp, intense session, and you're kind of, that's the deal you're doing. And then other days you'll go, do you know what, we're lowering the tempo today, and you add in corners at the end of a training session. All of a sudden the training session goes to 2.5 hours maybe, but the intensity is lower, so it's bigger volume, but it's lower intensity. So push your players hard, but be considered and plan what you're doing. Look at the color codes. Like, one thing we can definitely do is use common language. And like I said, one of the things that's made a really big difference for our coaching, and I'm talking from head coach right through to physio and nutritionist, is we all understand the colour codes, and it's made a massive difference. And again, one word gives you so much information, and it helps drive buy-in from players. So as a hockey community looking to drive performance, if we can start to use that language to each other in schools, clubs, national, it'll make a massive difference. We've answered a few questions as we've gone. We can open the floor if anybody's got anything specific they want to touch on. Like I said, we've got the bigger Hook for Life documents. I know for anyone that was on last week with Anya and Dave, he referenced it quite a bit. You'll have seen a lot of the work that Orlaith's done to put into it. We presented snippets of it tonight. That will be coming out, but I'm happy to put together a resource for people off the back of this webinar. If you want a little bit more information on RPE coding and how to manage that, or if you want more examples of what does an aerobic fitness session look like, or what does an anaerobic fitness session look like, we can send that. There was someone looking for some research papers. Aideen, I'll probably leave that one to you, seeing as you've written most of them. And yeah, so other than that, if anybody's got any questions that we haven't touched on already.
Darren, I might just jump in. I think most of those questions would normally have come at the end anyway, so it was good to address them throughout the presentation. So unless anything else pops up, we've taken up enough of you guys' time tonight. So can I just make a massive thank you? I thought there was another question coming in there. To Darren, Orla and Aideen for their time and expertise. That was hugely informative webinar, and we're already getting positive feedback on the thing on the site, so that's really good. Just to mention as well, I was just chatting to Adam Granger, High Performance Director. We are looking at bringing out a junior age group, so for underage players, welfare document, which is what the guys have been talking about here, which will guide those players who are playing maybe in between club, school, maybe they're playing on 2 different school teams, interpros and international, and it's becoming an issue for us with the amount of stuff that players are doing these days. So that document would be really helpful, and that's coming out in line with Hook for Life, which is what we talked about last week with Dave Passmore and Anya McNamara. So if there are no other questions, just a huge thanks again to Darren, Orla and Aideen. And we hope you've enjoyed the webinar, and indeed the 3 previous webinars before that. So we might leave it there, guys. Just thanks very much.
No problem.
That's great. Thanks.
Just if anyone does have